Hey there guys and girls, Manthis here and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to take a deep dive into Inscription, and boy oh boy is there a lot to talk about. This is arguably one of the most sort of hyped up professions, I should say, going into Shadowlands, and there's a lot of new stuff that we want to dive into and really get our heads around. So let's dive straight in and see what we can do. Let's not mess about. So you can see here, first thing we got to talk about is that this is going to be quite a long video, slightly longer than my normal videos I like to put out on this channel. So if you are looking for a TLDR version of this video, I'll leave a link up in the corner somewhere and firstly in the description as well, so that you guys can watch the TLDR version of Inscription. If this is the first time you're trying to get your head around Inscription for Shadowlands, I highly recommend you check out that video first. Pause this one, go watch that one, come back and then watch the full in-depth guide that we're going to go through now. Not so much of a guide, more of a deep dive. I guess that's the right way to describe it. So, what are we going to do with Inscription? Well, firstly, you can't talk about Inscription unless you start talking about herbalism, at least in a little bit, simply because that's going to be the main profession that's going to be fueling us with all our materials. So what are those materials? What are those herbs? What are we talking about? Well, in Shadowlands, there is 6 new herbs that we're going to be focusing on. Firstly, we have Death Blossom. Death Blossom is your sort of unique, somewhat generic herb for Shadowlands. It's available in all of the zones in Shadowlands, and it's something that you're going to pick up in large quantities as a herbalist. It's arguably going to be the cheapest of the herbs, simply because its availability is so wide. From there, we have Nightshade. Nightshade is the rare version of a Death Blossom. By my testing on the beta, they seem to spawn in the same location. So if you herbalists out there, if you're gathering up some Death Blossom or doing some herbalism at least, make sure you pick up each and every single Death Blossom you see, even if you don't think you need to, because it's got the chance to spawn back as a Nightshade. And when that be the case, the Nightshade is going to be super valuable, not just to herbalists, but to scribes and also alchemists. So this is kind of touching on a few bases. We then have 4 zone-specific herbs. There are 4 main zones in Shadowlands: Ardenweld, Bastion, Maldraxxus and Revendreth, and in each one of them there is a herb that is unique to them. You may have heard a similar thing be said for mining. It's a similar thing with herbalism as well. You got Vigil's Torch, you got Marrow Root, you got Rising Glory, and you got Widow Bloom. They're your 4 zone-specific herbs. And when it comes to gaining the inks that we need as a scribe, each of these herbs is going to give you different results, and we'll touch on those a little bit in a minute. But when you've got your herbs, what you're going to do is you're going to mill those herbs, and you're going to get yourself 3 different types of pigments, and it's from those pigments that you can then craft the inks that we need to run forward with Inscription and get everything crafted. 3 different inks. We've got them here. You've got your Luminous ink, your Umbral ink, and your Tranquil ink. Slightly unlike BFA, if you've leveled Inscription on BFA, you'll know that there was one ink, I want to call it Ultramarine ink. It may be incorrect. It's been a while since I played the live version of the game. There was one ink that was super low value, very, very rarely needed by any craft. You then had your mid-level ink, and then you had your high-tier ink. The way that it's working in Shadowlands is both Luminous ink and Umbral ink are on a level. They're used almost equally in almost all of the crafts. But the reason there's 2 different inks is because when you start milling some herbs, you get more Umbral ink, and when you mill some other herbs, you get more Luminous ink. So you gotta know exactly what you're milling and what herbs to focus on if you need one ink more so than another. We'll touch on that in a second. And thirdly, you have your Tranquil ink. This is your rare ink as such. This is what you're going to use in large quantities for things like Darkmoon cards and for Missives. They're some of the things that you're going to be crafting as a scribe. We'll get onto those shortly. But that's basically it when it comes to the materials. You need the herbs themselves. You're going to mill them down, and then you're going to turn them into the inks. Now, one thing that's very important is getting an understanding. If I buy this many if I buy this many herbs, mill them, how many inks am I going to be able to produce? That conversion is super important for when it comes to pricing the items that you craft. And fortunately, because I'm a boss, I've got that all for you. My Shadowlands cheat sheet, some of you may have seen this before. If you haven't, I'll leave a link to it down below in the description. You can pick this up for yourself. You have a whole bunch of stuff in the sheet just to give you a quick overview. It was originally designed for me to help get an understanding of the cost of the legendary items that are going to be crafted in Shadowlands. It's got some prospecting data, it's got some milling data in there, and it's even got a sheet that shows all the reputations that are needed for all the different professions as well. This is entirely yours, free to use. Please feel free. All you need to do with this that I kind of forget to mention to people a lot of the times is if you want to edit anything in this, you're going to need to save a copy of it locally. Just go to File, go to Make a Copy, save it locally, then you can edit it to your heart's content. But let's take a look at milling then. That's what we're focusing on today. So, quite simply, we've got the different herbs that we're going to mill. Let's focus on Death Blossom to start with. If you remember, Death Blossom is going to be the most common herb for you to obtain. It's likely to be the cheapest herb that's on the auction house. So if we buy a bunch of this and mill it down, what do we expect to get? Well, on the beta so far, I've spent a fair amount of time doing some herbalism and I've gathered up enough Death Blossom to mill over 2,000 Death Blossom, 2,200 to be exact. And from that, I've gained nearly identical amounts of Umbral Pigment and Luminous Pigment. This is good. This gives us some sort of reliable number that we can keep easily on ahead. We buy Death Blossom, this is what we should expect. There's a 14% mill rate on the Umbral Pigment, similar on the Luminous Pigment. You do very occasionally get Tranquil Pigment for the rare ink, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to mill Death Blossom to get it. When it comes to Tranquil Pigment, you're going to want to mill Nightshade. And this is where Inscription gets expensive. Yeah. Inscription is going to get expensive simply because of Nightshade. Nightshade is realistically the only herb you're going to want to mill for regular Tranquil Pigment. Tranquil Pigment, as you'll see later, is very, very important to us for the Missives and the Darkmoon cards. Two of the big reasons why you're going to want to level Inscription in Shadowlands. I've milled close to 700 Nightshade so far, and I've picked up over 200 Tranquil Pigment for my efforts. It's about a 30% mill rate, which is kind of good. It means that for every 3 Nightshade you pick up, you're likely to then make one of the Tranquil Inks, which will then go into your crafts later. It's a nice, easy number to try and remember. Now, the thing to note is this is beta-based data. There is a very good chance that when this goes live, these numbers may fluctuate slightly, so I highly recommend you download the sheet, you utilize it yourself. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward to use. If you've got any questions, jump into the live streams that we do Monday through till Friday, leave comments down below, hook me up on Twitter, whatever you need to do. I'm always happy to answer those questions if you have them. But milling is quite interesting. Death Blossom and Nightshade are the main two you're going to focus on. But what happens if we mill the zone-specific herbs? Well, Marrowroot, Rising Glory, Vigil's Torch, and Widow Bloom all appear to have slightly different mill rates, which is annoying. One uniform thing we can take out of it is that you're not going to get reliable Tranquil Pigment from milling the zone-specific herbs. This is simply going to be that if you get into a situation where you need significantly more, say for example you need a large quantity of luminous ink for doing some crafts, with this information I would then turn around to you and say, well, you probably want to get yourself some Vigil's Torch, as that has the best mill rate specifically for luminous pigment. You're not going to get a huge amount of Umbral Pigment, and you're really not going to get any Tranquil Pigment, but if you want to focus on a certain ink, you can do so with this information. Obviously, like I've said before, the more data you throw at this, the better the numbers will be. I'm sure some of you real gold goblins out there will be able to take this information and come up with some weird and wacky equations for TSM. You guys always surprise me with what you're able to do. But for the layman that just wants to pick up Inscription and sort of plow forward with it, the two herbs you're really going to want to focus on is Death Blossom to get your we'll call them the basic inks, the Umbral ink and the Luminous ink. If you need the rare Tranquil ink, you're going to want to mill Nightshade. There you go, there's a TLDR for you. So what else do we need to look at? We've looked at the milling, we've looked at the materials we need. Let's talk a little bit about the actual leveling of Inscription. Now, weirdly, leveling Inscription is in a bit of an odd place. I'll leave a link up in the corner or down in the description down below to the 1 to 100 leveling guide I did for Inscription a while back. It still stands true to this day, nothing has changed. Inscription is an odd one. All of the things that I crafted when leveling Inscription are these down here. I made 5 tomes of the Still Mind and I made 5 missives. That's literally all I crafted when leveling Inscription from 0 to 100. Alright, there's a slight white lie in there. I made a bunch of Darkmoon cards at the end. But you can gain, I think it's 25 points just by milling your first few herbs and then turning those herbs into inks. Once you hit skill 25, 30, something along those lines, I can't remember exactly, you have to craft yourself up a couple of the tomes of Still Mind. We'll get to these specific items in a minute, they'll start to make more sense. But then very quickly you get access to the mass milling. You do a little bit of mass milling of Death Blossom, the #1 herb I recommend to be your go-to herb. You mill a bunch of Death Blossom. Very quickly you unlock the ability to make tranquil inks, and then you can just sort of mill small amounts of nightshade as you need for the pigments to continuously craft tranquil inks, and this takes you all the way up to maybe 70, 75 skill points. At that point you craft a few missives and you hit 80. Once you hit 80 you get to the good stuff, you get the Darkmoon cards, and from there you're basically done through leveling Inscription. It's super quick, super simple to do. Don't worry yourself about the leveling of Inscription too much. A couple of things to note is you can arguably do this on a level 50 character. There's no real reason to push yourself forward to level 60 simply for the purpose of leveling Inscription. You'll get access to both the missives and the Darkmoon cards even on a base level 50-51 character. Actually leveling it, super quick and easy. It gets expensive when you have to start making the tranquil inks, but it's not an expense you can't recuperate simply because these tranquil inks, you're only going to dump them back into your crafting of Darkmoon cards and missives anyway, so it's not like it's a waste in any way, shape or form. Everything that you craft can be recuperated or sold on the auction house really simply, really easily. So I guess we need to get to the sort of the meat of the meal here, and what is it we're actually going to be crafting with our scribes? Well, I've mentioned a few times missives and I've mentioned a few times Darkmoon cards, but is there anything else of significance that we should look at? Yes, tomes of the Still Mind, your talent readjustment tomb. Most players usually will keep a few of these in their bags just so that if they're out in the world they can quickly change their talents on the fly if they feel the need to. The fact that these are stating that they require level 51 kind of gives me the impression that Blizzard are going to make it so that the past expansion ones, namely the ones from BFA and even the ones from back in Legion, will not work while in Shadowlands. That's been a sort of pattern that we've seen with a lot of the past expansion consumables. The Blizzard are saying they're from a past expansion, they're going to stay in the past expansion. Once we get to Shadowlands, these are probably going to be in quite high demand. They're reasonably pricey for the beginning of an expansion at least, but this is where you may find long term you're able to recuperate a lot of your costs for milling to get the... you're going to mill a lot, let me put it this way, you're going to mill a lot of nightshade so that you can craft Darkmoon cards and missives. The end result of that is that you're probably going to have an extra supply of both Luminous and Umbral inks, and Tombs of the Still Mind are going to be a really good thing to put them into. They're going to be reasonably pricey, but they're going to have virtually everybody in the game can make use of them. Even to this day, the Tombs and BFAs still sell really well. So this could be a good sort of good way to use any spare inks you have lying about. There's the Writ of Grave Robbing. This is just a lockpick thing. We don't really need to say too much about it. It's super cheap, super easy to make. I can't really say they're going to sell very well if I'm honest, but it's something you can craft. One thing you might notice that's missing here is the Codex. Codexes are still a thing in Shadowlands. The Codex of the Still Mind allows you to set out a codex, allowing all people in your party or raid to be able to adjust their talents. Usually if you're in some sort of organised raiding guild, there'll be somebody assigned to bring these to the raid to allow everybody to change their talents between bosses. These are a little bit more pricey to craft simply because they require the Tranquil ink. Now, as it stands, yes, they are locked behind a rep grind, but do not worry yourself, it's not too dramatic. You've only got to get to friendly with the Ascended in Bastion, and simply put, you could do a couple of world quests or do a few quests out in Bastion and you'll hit friendly without even realising it. No worries here at all. While we're on the topic actually of things that need to be picked up through reputation, I guess we should talk about the contracts. Contracts are back again. If you're aware of these from BFA, they simply gave players the ability to gain bonus rep with a certain faction by completing world quests, and it's exactly the same thing. There's the 4 main zone factions: Court of Harvesters, the Ascended, the Undying Army, and the Witch and the Wild Hunt. Each one of them have their representative contract. These do require the scribe to be revered to pick them up. I believe this is the same as how it's always been, but this does one major thing for Inscription, and it really emphasises having it on your main character. More so than any other profession in Shadowlands right now. Most of the other professions might have 1 or 2 items that are locked behind rep, but Inscription has like 5 or 6 of them, simply because of these contracts. Contracts at the beginning of an expansion sell really well, and like really well. People are trying to get those reputations to at least revered, often exalted, to pick up sort of like the best transmog items, the mounts that are available, that sort of stuff. There's a whole load of stuff that's locked behind reps at the beginning of an expansion, and people will be sought after these very quickly. They all use a similar amount of ink, so they're all going to potentially cost the same. You might find that some are more valuable than others. That's really going to depend on just how many people choose the different covenants. If there's a severe lack of people choosing one covenant, Necrolord, say for example, you might find that the Undying Army contract is a hotter seller. Simple terms though, guys: craft a bunch of these up, get them on the auction house. They will sell like hotcakes. Avantis Rune is something that is also back for scribes. You pick this up from the raid. This isn't available through just leveling the profession as normal. This has usually been the case though. Gives you that versatility boost when fighting a certain boss each week. All active raiders are going to want these eventually. So if you get access to the plan itself, craft a few up. They're going to sell well. What else have we got? I think we're at the point where we need to start talking about the good stuff. We got the staves as normal. We got 2 staffs that can be created. There's one with Agi, there's one with Intellect. These are both sort of leveling gear. They're only item level 100 as it stands on the beta right now. I don't really expect these to change. These are not really a big thing for scribes. They're just there. There's nothing really cool to say about them. There's also the offhand as well. That's going to be plus 23 stamina, couple of random stats, and of course intellect for the most part. Pretty costly in terms of ink requirement to make these, so be a little bit cautious with how many of these you craft. Luckily, you don't actually need to craft any of these whilst leveling the profession itself, so if you see that they're profitable on your server when the game goes live, craft a couple, bang them up on the auction house. It's not going to be a main thing for you as a scribe though. Yeah, now we get to the good stuff. Let's talk about missives. Missives, if you haven't seen what missives are a way, or they're referred to as an optional reagent. They have 2 primary uses in Shadowlands. Firstly, they're a key component to crafting legendary items. To craft your legendary item, you need a base legendary item, you need 2 missives, of different stats. You can't stack them, unfortunately. You need 2 different missives, then you need a legendary power, and you need a whole bunch of soul ash from Torghast. You take all of that to the rune carver and you get to make your legendary. So in theory that means every single character that wants to craft a legendary is going to need to buy 2 missives off you. Now the goblins out there are going money, yes. In that regard, very true, but remember that each character is then only going to buy 2 from you, as the amount of legendaries that people can craft is going to be limited, very heavily time limited. You can only get a certain amount of soul ash every week, so people aren't going to be crafting legendaries like crazy. They're only going to be crafting 1 each, so the market is quite small there for that purpose. The additional purpose for these missives is to sell them to other crafters. namely your tailors, your jewel crafters, your leather workers, and your blacksmiths. Those guys are likely to want these missives for the purpose of defining the secondary stats that appear on their crafted gear. By default, when you craft an item, the secondary stats are random. The game is going to pick it's going to pick 2 of the 4 available, and it's going to put that on that crafted item. So there's an air of uncertainty when you're crafting items. Tailors, blacksmiths, leatherworkers, and jewel crafters can use these missives to determine which secondary stats appear on their crafted gear. Now, in theory, that sounds really good. There's one significant problem, though, with it I see as it stands currently. The missives are too expensive. Simply put, the fact that the missives use tranquil ink as one of the components to craft them makes them way too expensive for tailors, leatherworkers, blacksmiths, jewel crafters to see it an advantage to use them. In some cases, take a tailor for example, it could potentially not even double the cost of crafting an item. It could triple the cost of creating an item just to say, I want these 2 stats on it. Where that tailor could just craft a couple of those items anyway and get lucky and get the stats that they already want. The easy fix to this, if Blizzard is watching, I doubt you are watching, because why would you? But the matter of the fact is as it stands right now, I feel the missives are just too expensive for the use of other crafters to buy them, which does dramatically reduce the amount of people that might look to get into Inscription, or to at least to buy these. You might see a big surge of these hit the auction house really quickly when Shadowlands goes live, for 2 reasons. 1, because people need them from the base legendary items, but 2, you are somewhat forced into crafting some of them through the leveling of Inscription. Which means that those people that level Inscription are going to dump a bunch of these on the auction house, regardless of whether there's many people out there to buy them. In simple terms, I think this needs a bit of a switcheroo, a bit of a change in terms of its reagents before it goes live. If it stays the way that it is, and it's 8 inks, basically 10 basic inks and 1 tranquil ink, they're likely to be between 500 to 1,000 gold each, which is just going to be too expensive for the other crafters. But your results may vary. Then I guess the last thing we really need to talk about things that we craft with Inscription, probably the one that everybody's been waiting for, Darkmoon cards. Yes, Darkmoon cards are back, Darkmoon trinkets are back, and there's a lot to say about these. They are significantly different to how they were in BFA. A lot of people look to go with Inscription this time in Shadowlands because they saw how much gold people made back in BFA. At the beginning of BFA, the Darkmoon cards and the Darkmoon trinkets were selling for ridiculous numbers. There's a few reasons why, and we'll dive into it in a little bit of detail, but firstly let me sort of just give you the ins and outs of how it works in Shadowlands so we have a good understanding. The primary craft is the Darkmoon card of death. This is going to create a random card. It's going to pull one of any of the 32 potential Darkmoon cards from any of the 4 decks. So you have the ace through till the 8 of each of the deck. Some of the icons are still a bit bugged on the beta right now. I'm sure they'll fix this before it goes live. But of the 4 decks, the Veracity deck, the Putrescence deck, the Repose deck, and the Indomitable deck, there's 8 cards each, so a 1 in 32 chance of getting any of those. It appears to be an equal chance. It's just a bit of RNG there for you. There is also a chance that it will proc a bonus card. Now this card isn't numbered. It's what they refer to as a blank card. So you'll see here you have a blank card of Veracity, a blank card of Putrescence, a blank card of Repose, and a blank card of the Indomitable. What are these blank cards for? Well, the blank cards are basically a way to create an additional Darkmoon card that is specific to that deck, but at a slightly cheaper price. So you'll see those 4 here. If we just pick the one of the Indomitable for the purpose of the video, you can take a blank card of the Indomitable and add Smouldering Ego, thank you for the subscription, welcome, welcome. You can add Tranquil Ink to a single blank card, and the smart ones of you may have noticed that it cuts down 14 inks from the cost of the Darkmoon card. So there is the chance that you can proc a bonus blank card and then you get to create another Darkmoon card at a cheaper rate. This is the only sort of random element when it comes to Darkmoon cards that's different from how it was in BFA. For my testing, the blank cards proc at about a 30% chance. Earlier today on stream, we crafted 50 Darkmoon cards. And from those 50 Darkmoon cards, we got ourselves, 14 blank cards, which you extrapolate that out, it works out to be 28%. So there's going to be about a 28-30% chance of getting a blank card. So if you want to do any maths in terms of working out your prices of the Darkmoon cards individually, you might want to take that into consideration, but just to be aware of it. Now, what are the issues that I see with the Darkmoon cards in Shadowlands? The first issue is that competition is going to be ridiculous for these. Inscription has been super hyped on the basis of everybody remembering how much people made with Darkmoon cards back in the day. The difference is that there's virtually no barrier to entry for Inscription this time. As we spoke earlier, virtually anybody can level their scribe. They don't even need to be actively playing Shadowlands on that character. It could sit on an alt. That alt could level up to 80 in Shadowlands Inscription pretty easily just by buying some herbs off the auction house. They could then start crafting Darkmoon cards at exactly the same rate as anybody else. This is going to provide a situation where there's a lot of people pumping Darkmoon cards onto the auction house, and you may find that there's just, especially on the higher population realms, there's just crazy amounts of competition on these. Now, of course, the availability of herbs is going to have some effect on this, but in reality, there's going to be a lot of competition. One question I've been asked a few times about Darkmoon cards is that people have turned around and told me that they are not simming fantastically well. Those guys that are out there that are really keen on getting the sort of the best in slot items are sort of saying, well, the Darkmoon cards don't look as good this time round. Realistically, I don't really see that being much of an issue, basically because for the first tier of the expansion, trinkets are usually really difficult to come by. You have tailors, blacksmiths, leatherworkers, you have a whole bunch of different ways to create the majority of gear. If you need, you can go run your dungeons, you can go run your mythic pluses, this sort of stuff, but that gear source is still somewhat random. Anybody can go to the auction house with enough gold and buy an item level 200 trinket in terms of the Darkmoon cards. That just simply means that most players that enter the first raid are going to walk in with at least one Darkmoon card equipped. The market for these is going to be very strong. Even if they don't sim best in slot, you have 2 trinket slots. Maybe it sims second best in slot. Maybe you don't get the drop from the dungeon that you wanted to because it's restricted to heroic and you can only run it once a day. Maybe the world quest hasn't popped for the trinket that you really need. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you may need another trinket before you start going into the raid. The Darkmoon card trinkets are going to be the answer to that. So yeah, that's what we are crafting with Inscription as a whole. What do we need to talk about now then? Oh, Glyphs, of course. We should definitely talk about Glyphs. There isn't any. Glyphs, Shadowlands, there isn't any. There's not much really more I can say about that. Maybe it's just the fact that they haven't been implemented to the game as it stands now. But as of recording, 27th of October, arguably, I think this is the day that Shadowlands was meant to go live in the first place. There were no glyphs in Inscription, so there's really not much for me to talk about there. Of course, glyphs will still be a good seller for many people, but you're going to be relying on glyphs from a past expansion. Nothing new in Shadowlands, unfortunately. Bit of a shame. So yeah, let's talk just ever so briefly about the selling of these items. We spoke about how Darkmoon cards are going to be super competitive. Missives are in a weird sort of place in terms of the fact that although they have 2 primary uses, one of those uses may be dead on arrival if they're just too expensive. But what I have done for you regardless is I've put together a TSM group, which will be in a paste bin down below. Where are we? Here we go. Inscription. This contains all of the things you're going to craft with Inscription, and I've put them into some simple groups. When it comes to the Darkmoon cards, I've subcategorized them into the 4 different types. So Indomitable, Putrescence, Repose, and Veracity. I've also then split out the Trinkets and the blank cards, as you may want to apply different operations to those. In fact, realistically, you definitely should. You may even want to break the Trinkets down even further, but that's up to you. This is a nice basic group setup. You can import this into your TSM and be up and running straight away. That is in a paste bin down below. So final thoughts on Inscription. It's looking kind of good. It is going to be a big money maker in Shadowlands, and it's definitely got a lot of potential. There are still some room for improvements, and I certainly hope that Blizzard balances a couple of things. Like I said, the Missives I feel are a little bit too expensive, and I definitely feel that Darkmoon cards are going to have a lot of competition, but on the flip side are going to have a lot of potential customers for them. Shadowlands Inscription is looking good. I'm not going to main it, but I'm definitely going to have it up and running on my alt, and I hope to make an awful lot of gold with it, and I hope you do too. So then guys, I hope that video was helpful to you. That was my deep dive into Shadowlands Inscription. If you're new around here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. At the very least, give this video a like, and guys, I'll see you next time. Peace.